Hello, true believers. I am your host, Jamming Jamil Payne, and with me, as always, is my co-host, the amazing Amanda Cohen. How are you doing today?
Amazing.
Okay. See, the reason I did that alliteration, because today, listeners, we are talking about the life of Stan Lee. Stan Lee, for those who don't, let's start right there. Everybody know who Stan Lee is. If you don't know who Stan Lee is and you listening to this podcast, what the hell are you doing with your life, and how did you come across us? I'm pretty sure you're a Russian spy.
Everyone, even people who don't know who Stan Lee is, have been impacted by what he created. So even if you don't know Stan Lee, you know Stan Lee. It's just unavoidable.
Stan Lee, born Stanley Martin Lieber, born December 28th, 1922, Brooklyn, Jewish man. Was with Marvel from the very beginning. He was there when Jack Kirby created Captain America. And I don't know what else to say, man. Like, it's fucking Stan Lee. Like, what can you say about a man that has brought so much joy to everyone's lives over the last 50 years?
Well, let me, do you remember when you learned who Stan Lee was?
No, he's just
No?
always been around. Like, that's the thing. Like, he's just always been here.
But I mean, did you ever have a moment where, because I think part of what is so impressive about him is that he had a hand in so many, I mean, almost all of Marvel's most popular properties. And it's one thing to be like, you know, it's one thing to be like, oh, yeah, like, that's the guy who invented Superman. But he's the guy who invented, like, the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and X-Men
and the Hulk
and Avengers. Yeah. So,
and Thor. Well, the version of Thor we know. Like,
right. So I do know that for me, there was a moment where, like, I went from knowing Stan Lee as, like, just vaguely as a Marvel presence to realizing that he was instrumental in sort of the whole Marvel philosophy. You know, like I just compared him. Yeah. So the guy who invented Superman, what else did he do? Right?
Like Joe Shuster and I forgot the other one name, but not much after, no.
Right. So just there was a moment where I came to realize, like, oh, he was in everything. Like, he's a much larger presence. And it wasn't even just the details of the characters, but it was more like he kind of combined sort of like the pulpy, really dramatic soap opera-y feel of, like, other genres and brought it into the superhero genre and just kind of gave Marvel its voice. Sort of brought, like, a sense of showmanship. And God, I want to say that, like, I don't know, to me it feels like his contribution was almost more of like a marketing thing. Like, he was like a story guy, like an idea guy. And I know that there was a point where I went from being like, oh yeah, Stan Lee is a name I've heard. And I started looking at what he actually did, and I was like, wait, he did that, and 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 he did that. Just kind of makes you feel small for a second, and then you go back to being thankful for all of those things.
The first thing I remember about Stan Lee is the 90, maybe 91 Marvel collector cards, the first wave of those. Me and my brother used to collect those. My brother's 12 years older than me, so we used to go to the store and buy these collector cards, right? And like, you know, it'll have like the cool heroes and all their stats and stuff and win-loss records. Great. Almost my introduction into comic books, right? Like, you know, that's a great primer.
Mm-hmm.
And they had one for Stan Lee. I'm like, who is this? My brother, like, that's Stan Lee. That's the guy you always hear, like, in the Spider-Man cartoons and stuff. I was like, oh, and I read, like, oh, he created all these characters? And that's, like, yeah, but, like, even before then, it's a voice I knew. It's somebody I heard. Because he used to be in all the damn cartoons. Like, all the old 60 cartoons, you know, because it's, like, 90. There wasn't any new ones, so we just used to rent those, or they used to be on TV. And he used to introduce all of them. So he's always been a presence in one way or another in my life as far back as I could remember. It's just one of those things where, like, I can't quite recall who I knew Stan Lee was, because Stan Lee has always been here. From my earliest, foggiest childhood memories to right now, he's always been there. And, like, his legacy, everything he leaves behind, it's just, I want to say this. I think Stan Lee is a tremendous writer. I've heard, like, recently, and I've always heard this, to be honest with you, right? That he wasn't a very good writer. Like, if you read those comic books, you know, it's kind of cheesy. They're kind of bombastic. They're kind of, you know, they're kind of corny. Not like by today's standard, right? But what Stan,
yeah, absolutely.
but what Stan did was, he gave them complex, like if you strip away all that bombast, he gave all these characters, like, genuine human emotions that people can relate to. He was just writing in the style that was popular at the time. But, like, the man that created Spider-Man, right, with that origin story, and the whole concept of, like, oh, let's have a superhero that has real problems. That's not a bad writer. That's a fucking genius. Cause we take it for credit now. We take it for granted now, right? But back in 1964, 63, when all those characters was created, nobody was doing that in comics. It was
they weren't doing it in superhero comics, but, like, at the time, a lot of other genres were really popular still, right? Because this was superheroes were sort of less popular after World War II, right?
Well, what happened was the whole comic code thing, and because of that, they just started writing monster comics. And I guess it was kind of popular, but, like, what Marvel did was, and Stan by extension, was bring it back to almost the mainstream. So yeah, if you want to say popular, it was only popular because there was nothing else out. It was a bunch of horror comics, romance comics. Then you had DC with their heroes. It was like the same white dude, right? They all talked like your dad. None of the stories really made sense. You know, they were very like standalone. Like, you don't get Watchmen unless Stan Lee showed everybody that you can do more with superheroes. Peter Parker been broke most of his life. That's because of Stan Lee. Because that's more interesting than, like, you know, Superman, who has the powers of a god. Or Bruce Wayne, who has all the money in the world. Or Green Lantern, who can create anything with his ring. None of these people had personal issues. Stan brought that. Stan did.
Right, which is interesting because, like, do you really consider that writing, or do you consider that, like, the idea and, like, the marketing?
No,
because like, you can come up and say, like, hey, like, here's the direction I think we should go, here's the voice I think we need to use, and then delegate to everyone else, which I feel like is specifically where any, like, contention about his legacy comes in.
Okay, I didn't take any notes. I took one note. I
Hmm.
got this one word. The power cosmic. To me, that sums up Stan Lee's whole legacy. Supposed to be followed by with great power comes great responsibility. When the Silver Surfer was invented by Jack Kirby, which Stan Lee gives full credit to, that Kirby created the Silver Surfer on his own. You could have just said cosmic power. You know what I'm saying? The Silver Surfer comes down with cosmic powers. Stan Lee flipped that on his head and called the power cosmic, which is a thing now, right? You know what I'm saying? Everybody remembers that, right? The
Mm-hmm.
power cosmic. That's genius. You know what I'm saying? He knew that this is mundane. Let me flip this. Let me give this a ring to it. And if you read those comics, right? If you read a lot of those comics, a lot of them are corny, but a lot of those jokes hold up. That's all stands. Like there's like a very like self-deprecating tone to a lot of that stuff. That still carries over today. If you look at a Marvel movie, Marvel movies kind of have that. You know what I'm saying? Then like with great power comes responsibility. If you just think about that, right? Everybody knows that line. Steve Ditko didn't think of that line. And I'm not knocking them, right? You know what I'm saying? But, like, for all the pretty pictures, right, it took Stan's, like, humanizing touch to make these characters what they are.
Yeah, I'm not saying he didn't add anything. I'm just saying that I think what he added isn't really called writing. If that makes any sense. Like, I don't know, like you take stories that you hear about the worst iteration of the Marvel method where, you know, Stan Lee grabs an artist and sits in a room with him for like 5 minutes being like, and I think they should do this and then I think they should do that, and then says, okay, go do it. And like that's his role in the entire process. It's like, okay, he's like the story idea. He's the idea guy. He's come up with, you know, like I keep saying, tone and voice. He's adding that. I just don't know if I call that writing. Like, I don't know if we have a word. Like, he was like the Steve Jobs of Marvel, right? Like, he wasn't. It's just so difficult for me to imagine this guy. Like, he wasn't actually like scripting comics.
Well, he would script like he'll write an outline. Like sometimes he would explain it. Well, and like I guess.
So I'm just saying, like, I don't think writing is the right word. Just because of like the way we think about how comics are created today. Stan Lee never did that.
If you ever look at old comics, they assume the art was just going to carry it, right? Stan was the first one to be like, no, we need good stories. We just can't have like the art be good. Did that make any sense?
But that's still not writing. You know, like I guess what I'm saying is, so, you know, like in my like personal Stan Lee experience. Okay, so first there was this like amorphous, vague idea that Stan Lee was a Marvel guy, and then there was this specific knowledge that he was involved in all of this stuff going on in everything, and that he inserted himself into literally every aspect of Marvel that he could, especially the aspects where he would be visible, which is not the sort of thing, which I don't really want to penalize him for being
charismatic.
Right, I was going to say, this is a digression. Most of the people who work in comic books aren't really great at talking about how awesome they are. And they're very humble and they're very introverted and they're not really the type to stand up and be like, hey, look at me. And I don't want to penalize Stan for just being like the one guy in the industry who was like, no, I don't mind doing the publicity tours. But there was, so over the course of getting to know more about him, when I first imagined that he had created all of these characters, I like imagined him like, you know, quietly squirreling away at a desk and coming up with all these ideas and like, you know, working really, really, really hard. And over time, I came to sort of more imagine it as less of like the boring work and more of just like the fun idea guy. Like, we hear stories about writers' retreats now where Marvel will get their main creators together and they all get to meet up in person and decide like, this is the main course for the next 2 years and this is what the crossover event is going to be like. And I'm like, okay, so Stan Lee was doing like all of that himself. It's just, it's very difficult for like I don't know what the word for that is because that's not sitting at a desk writing. But in some sense it's even more important. I'm just like, I don't know. We need to make a new word for it and it should be called Stan Lee-ing or something, right? Like,
and this is no secret. Stan will tell you this is Steph, and he always have. At the beginning of a character, right? He's really involved, right? Any character he created, he's really involved in at the beginning, right? He got to shepherd this character off. He got to make sure it's good. But then, like, once everything gets going, he's kind of like, all right, Dicko, do what you do, and I just put words in. That's what it seems like. Like, you know what I'm saying? He's really involved at the beginning, right? He's involved with the creation, realization, you know what I'm saying? You know, 3 or 4 issues in, he probably writes like a detailed, like, you know, thing. But after like 3 or 4 issues, he just kind of let all the artists just do their thing. You know, he'll give some input. And like, he was always honest about this. Like, I guess we just have to talk about like the idea that somehow Stan Lee like stole credit. Stan Lee has never stole credit whatsoever. What he does is, what he's really good at, as you said, is congratulating himself. But Stan Lee has never stole credit. Stan Lee has always been honest and upfront from day one about what the hell he does. He has never lied. Not once. I've looked everywhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, everywhere to find this, where he was just like, oh, I did this by myself. I can't find anything. Like even I didn't send this to you, right? But he even, like, in one of his Marvel bullpens, where he used to write in the back of every comic, he just explained it straight out. There's like, yeah, they do most of the work. Then, you know, I sent you those 2 like clips, those 2 panels where like it's him and Ditko, and he's joking about it, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, Stan, all you do is just put your name on it. Stan wrote that about himself.
Yep. Right, which is why I was saying, like, I don't think we should blame him just because, like if there had been Twitter back in the 60s, he would have been like the guy who was on Twitter all the time.
Exactly.
Or actually, no. He would have been the one who wasn't on Twitter because he would have been the one like out in the real world doing stuff. And all of the other guys would have been back on Twitter being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how many issues Stan wants me to draw of this thing. And oh my gosh. And like he, I feel like he just should have been he was meant for like a different industry. You know, he was like a musician or something, and he just ended up in comic books instead, and made comic book music, and that's why he just didn't fit in and was able to sort of like take over and like inspire so much.
It seemed like his biggest sin is just being charismatic. It's not stealing credit. It's none of that. Because again, he never has. Like, he's always been. Look, I think Kyle, my co-host on my other show, Explain It Place, he's not a credit taker, but he is a credit hog, which is, you know, that's just him. Like who you gonna interview? The loud, charismatic Jewish guy, or this sullen, cranky Aaron Rand loving Steve Ditko? Who you gonna interview? Really?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but who you gonna interview? You're gonna interview the guy with the made up funny words and the loud booming voice that can eloquently put into words what's awesome about comic books and why everybody should read comic books, not just kids. And I think that's his real legacy. This show doesn't exist without Stan Lee. Stan Lee single-handedly created the comic book community. For good or ill, he created this community. He created this community. He gave everybody, he made everybody feel like they was a part of this. And he doesn't have to share that with nobody. Not Jack, not Steve. Absolutely nobody. He if it wasn't for him going on TV and telling everybody how great comic books was to anybody that would listen, I'm not sure comic books would have survived the way they did without him.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully put. I'm like, there's, yeah, we also don't really have a good word for doing that either.
No, we don't. Just evangelize to everybody, right? College campuses, radio shows, TV shows. They had to think, who the hell is this weird dude on here talking about this kid stuff? But it stuck. It resonated with people.
There is, I'm just trying to think, is there anybody working in comics right now who even comes close to that level of, I guess, personality cult? Like, does Rob Liefeld get that? Was he 90s Stan Lee?
Well, that's what brings me up to a point. I was listening to another podcast called The Comic Conspiracy, which is ran by a comic book owner. And I don't know how true this is, but he was like, the rumors, people always said Stan stole stuff even back then, but it really took fire when the Image guys was like in charge of everything. Because, they're artists. You know what I'm saying? So, like, of course, from their point of view, their work is way more important than any writer or ideal guys, right? So, from my understanding, it really caught fire in the 90s, when the Image guys came around. Because
yeah, and I see that. I see what you're...
And like, for everything people talk about Stan and who wrote what, right? Kirby and Ditko wasn't really able to create anything. Like, you could tell they wasn't writers. Like we argue about Stan, right? But have you ever read like Ditko and like Kirby stuff without Stan?
I feel like I've read some Kirby stuff, but no, go ahead.
It's not very good. Like, Stan's style is dated, right? So, like, Stan kept writing. It's just his style became dated, which, happens, right?
Yeah.
But like, Stan never, Stan never stopped writing the way he wrote. But, like, without Stan, Kirby and Ditko stuff just wasn't as good. Like, Kirby created, like, the new guys. But in his hands, it was no good. It wasn't until people came along later and did stuff with those characters.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not knocking them. They deserve just as much credit. But their art wasn't going to get us to where we are now.
And they weren't the sort of people to go out and say, like, to do like the promotional stuff.
Exactly. John Romita said it best, like, Stan is a con man, but he's a con man that delivers. He's a carnival barker. That's what he is. His love for this medium is like, he's seen his dream comes to fruition. So we shouldn't be too sad.
In a big way. I can't imagine what it would be like to see your influence on the world.
And for everybody to love you so late in life. And also, Stan Lee was 40 years old when the Fantastic Four came out. So anybody worried that their creative endeavors and they're too old for their creative endeavors, just remember, Stan became famous in the second half of his life.
I feel like that also has a lot to do with his attitude towards like self-promotion as well. Like, that he's been around long enough to know that like he's got to get out there and sell it. He can't just wait for it to happen. He's too old for that.
Well, look, you know what? But you know what? We're really not talking about Stan's biggest strength as a creator, not even as like the great, Stan Lee that promotes comics.
Mm-hmm.
Stan Lee was a great eye for talent and editorial. That's what Stan's really work. That's what Stan's real work come in. This is a true story. Ditko and Stan introduced the Green Goblin, right? And the big mystery became, who's the Green Goblin?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the reasons Ditko left was he wanted to be somebody random. And Stan was like, no, we build up this mystery. It has to be somebody we know, Ditko, Steve. It has to be
That's
somebody
true.
we
That's
know.
how stories work. That's how mysteries work. It has to be a character you've already met.
And Steve like, no, because in real life it'd just be some random punk. It just wouldn't be anybody. And Stan kind of vetoed him like, nah, it's going to be Norman Osborn. Who was right in that situation?
Yeah, clearly this is a obvious one. Stanley is definitely right in the, you pull from soap operas, you pull from mystery noir, you make it real in the emotions, but not real in the details, like,
And that was his work. I mean, if you want to talk about if he's not really a writer, then he might be the greatest editor ever then.
Yes. He Stanley'd it.
Exactly, because like those books, to move that many characters, right? For him to have a hand in creating that many characters and to move that many books and that many comics, right? You had to have a strong editorial eye.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. Also an eye for talent, because it's just not Kirby and Ditko, right? There's Strinko, there's Buscemi, John Romita. Like he kind of helped all these guys along in becoming famous because he had an eye for talent. He might have thought like, good, if I hire these guys, I ain't got to do as much work. But that ain't the point. He clearly had an eye for talent and for editorial. And like as a creator, that's where his best work. I mean, that's where his biggest strength come in at. There's this video I should have showed you where he used to do this show, like back in like 91, 92, and he had Seth MacFarlane and Rob Liefeld on it.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, he was going to sit and talk to them about their creations while they together drew this character that they was going to sell for charity, right? And man, the backhanded compliments Stan kept giving them was fucking hilarious, because that character looked ridiculous. And all the backhanded passive aggressive compliments he was giving, it was so fucking funny. Because Stan was like, if you read between the lines, Stan was like, this character looks terrible and it's fucking ridiculous. And on the spot, he thought of an origin story for this character, and it was pretty good, because like in the classic MacFarlane and Liefeld style, this motherfucker had pouches and chains everywhere and all type of weird shit, right?
Yeah.
So Stan looked at that character and was like, huh. So it's kind of like, he's so bad and so evil, he has to keep all this stuff so he can keep it inside him. So like, it won't burst out and destroy everybody. Like, oh, and MacFarlane looked at him like, who has like a bit of an eye for writing, like, you know what, Stan, that's not bad. And it wasn't. He just looked at that ridiculous ass character and just thought of something that made halfway sense on why it looked that way. And this is 1991 Stan, so he's way past his prime in creating.
Also such a gift to be able to take something, the right combination of taking something seriously, like treating it as though it's important, and also being able to have a sense of humor about it. Like to sit there and be able to say, like, they're only comics, and mean, like, they're only comics as in, like, they're just stories, and then to be like, they're only comics as in, like they're super important, and like they're, you know what I'm saying?
No, you are absolutely right.
That's a weird, I mean, today, like, I feel like a lot of publishers have trouble balancing that. Like, I feel like that was one of the problems with the New 52 was I wasn't sure like how DC felt about their own books. Like I was like, are you embarrassed about them? Do you think they're awesome and like super dark and edgy? Like, are they super serious? Are they super stupid? I was like, I feel like you don't know how you feel about your own books.
We are grown people in our 30s that read comics. He was the first person to say you can be an adult and enjoy these. He was the first person to say that. Like, you don't have to hide in the shadows. You don't have to be ashamed. You know what I'm saying? You can like these are like you said, these are comic books, and you could take them seriously. Damn it.
So do you have like I mean, you've shared a few favorite stories. Do you have like maybe, well, I guess the Power Cosmic. I was going to say, do you have like a favorite Stan Lee character, like of all the things that he?
I mean, well, Spider-Man is like my second or first favorite character. Like,
Okay.
depending on the days, like it's him and Batman, right? So those are like my two favorite. So Spider-Man is up there. Also, I do love the Silver Surfer, but even though that's not really his, but it is because he gave it a voice. But like Silver Surfer, maybe not necessarily stories per se, but just the look of the Silver Surfer. And like when the Silver Surfer shows up, right, you know shit is serious. Like he just doesn't show up. Like he just don't show up for no reason. Like you see that fucker coming. Like something's coming with him. Even Free from Galactus, something coming with him. But I mean, he created everybody. What the hell you want me to say, Amanda? Like shit.
I wasn't.
What, Captain? Well, look, he didn't create Captain America, right? That's another thing he don't get credit for. True enough, he didn't create Captain America, but he was there when Captain America was created. But what he did was he created the version of Captain America that we love.
Mm-hmm.
The man out of time, frozen in a block of ice, Captain America, that's Stan Lee's. That's not Joe Simon and Jack Kirby's creation. That's Stan Lee's. So what we love about Captain America, why we love Captain America, comes a lot from Stan, even though he didn't create that character. But like, what you want me to say? Fantastic Four are awesome.
I don't know. I just felt like we had talked a lot about him as like Stan Lee as like an individual and like what he contributed. I wasn't sure if there was like any more like comic content specific stuff that you wanted to.
Well, the coming of Galactus is definitely a highlight. The first issue of Spider-Man Amazing Fantasy 15 is definitely a highlight. The Avengers story, like when the Avengers all come together, that's another one. Also, them finding Captain America. There's a few. There's definitely a few stories that like are really like him and whoever the artist is firing on all cylinders. You know what I'm saying? But if I had to boil it down, it's either Amazing Fantasy 15 or The Coming of Galactus for like my favorite like Stan Lee stories. Shit, he created Groot. I'm sorry. I'm looking at a list of all the created characters he created. I did not know he created Groot. God damn. I'm sorry. Hello?
That's funny. I'm sorry. I lost it too. Yeah, wow. I was going to say, I read Amazing Fantasy 15, yesterday, kind of thinking about having this conversation, and, it's amazing how, like, you can see that inspiration in, like, every single version of Spider-Man and, like, every single Spider-Man movie, and I felt like I'd read it a million times before.
And probably never read the actual original story before.
Yeah. And it was funny because it was like, it almost feels like the way, so it is a little dated in sort of the way that it's more of like a third person narration where like a lot of the dialogue isn't really dialogue, it's just the characters saying what they're thinking. And that there's sort of like really heavy narration to explain what's going on sometimes. it almost comes across as like a fairy tale. Like he was making like modern fairy tales. You know, like Once Upon a Time, like, you know, there was a beautiful princess who fell asleep in a castle. He's like, once upon a time, there was a teenager that didn't have any friends because he was a nerd. Like,
Well, the weird thing, what I find is, like, it's definitely dated. So I don't want to make it sound like it's not dated. But it's not as dated as you would think in a lot of cases. And it's weird, right? Because you read Imagine Fantasy 15, there's some dated shit in there, but it's not, like, so dated where you're just laughing at it, in my opinion.
yeah, it feels like I would say, it feels like he was almost going straight for like fairy tale status.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to tell these stories, like, I'm going to make these stories important by telling them like they're important. And like, just sort of, this is a little bit like, Prometheus. We're going to talk about Prometheus a lot for like the rest of our lives, I think. He sort of like wrote the words as though they were important and then shaped reality around that. Like, I'm going to tell this stupid superhero story, but I'm going to make it important, and I'm going to treat it as though it's important, and I'm going to tell people it's okay for them to like it, and I'm going to make a world where the story is a fairy tale that everyone knows and everyone tells, except it's going to happen in my lifetime, so I'm going to get to enjoy the credit for it. Yeah,
I will say this. Maybe the one bad thing I'll say, maybe he could have did more for his fellow creators, right? Because what people don't realize is he never owned Marvel Comics. He was just the editor. So while he wielded power, he didn't technically, write the checks. But maybe he could have did more.
Yeah.
All things being fair, maybe he could have got, Kirby and Ditko some more credit. Maybe he could have made sure they had more money. You know what I'm saying? Basically, it seemed like his contract wasn't that good, but he found a way to finesse it to it was that good, but he only did it for himself and for nobody else. And maybe he should have.
I do think that's a really fair point. But it also goes back to what we were saying earlier, where it's like, well, just because he's the type of guy who would go to his boss and, argue that he deserves a raise and he deserves this, and stereotypically your comic book artists aren't that sort of person.
No, they're not.
I don't like, it's sort of, this comes up in a lot of workplace environments where it's like, oh, like the people who get promoted or the people who get raises are the types of people who would ask for that, which also generally makes them kind of like assholes who maybe don't deserve it.
Squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, it definitely he's good he gets out there and makes sure everybody knows who he is, and then he throws out oh yeah, I don't do it alone. The artists do a lot. And he could have, I don't know, in retrospect, it's very easy to say that he could have done more.
And another thing too, what other people say, and I think you can't stress this enough. Nobody did shit like that back then. It's just the way comics work. So can we blame him for not having foresight? And cause back then, right, artists were just freelancers. He didn't make that up. That's just how it was. Can we really blame him for a practice that was already in play? It's easy to say in hindsight, right?
Mm-hmm.
He could have did more. He could have, he could have made them free. He should have fought for them not to be freelancers and full employees. But nobody was doing that. How is he supposed to know?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he's done a lot of other things that seemed
Ahead of his time.
Ahead of his time.
You know what?
If there's
Touche.
anybody who was going to do that,
early.
So we'll just blame him a little bit less then.
Yeah, we just blame him a little bit less. Just also,
we grade him on a curve for the time that he's a product of.
And also, if we the reason Stan stepped back from editorial was it was Stan who got all this shit on TV. Stan was like, all right, I'm stepping down. I'm going to Hollywood, baby. We're going to get all our characters on TV. That was Stan going like to Hollywood, making like deals to get cartoons on TV and trying to get movies and stuff. Stan had that idea before anybody. Stan was like,
it strikes me, he was like the anti-gatekeeper.
Yes.
When so many comic book fans are like, no, like comic books are the thing that I do to like escape from the real world where like everybody sucks. Stan was like, no, like comic books are the thing that we should share with everybody. That is, yeah, I'm really, I haven't had a lot of time to just talk about Stan Lee with anybody else I know. So I'm really appreciating getting to, like I had one or two coworkers who were like, oh yeah, Stan Lee, the Batman guy died. And I'm just like, no. So I haven't really had time to reflect on, what the industry would be like now without him, or how
there wouldn't be no industry, or not as big, or like, I just don't think, I mean, I don't think DC could have carried this by themselves.
Right.
It took somebody that was just like, no, I'm gonna break down all the rules as far as what's acceptable in storytelling, in like advertisement and everything, right? Like, oh, you had a Batman like TV show that's cute. I'm gonna make movies. And it took a long time for that to happen. Like, DC beat him to the punch, but he always had the ideal. You know what I'm saying? He always had that ideal to make movies. I was actually listening to this podcast called On Writing with David Chen and C. Robert Cargill. C. Robert Cargill used to work for Ain't It Cool News, and he wrote the Doctor Strange comic.
Okay.
And he was talking about not the comic, the movie, the Doctor Strange movie. So what happened was he wrote the movie with like somebody else, right? The next thing you know, all these other writers came forward and was like, hey, no, we did work on that too. And they're like, what the hell are you talking about? Come to find out, they've been writing Doctor Strange scripts since like the early 80s by some very famous people, including like Bob Gale, who wrote like, Back to the Future, right? So like the old rules used to be, if you worked on it at all, you used to get credit. But the rules don't change, so they had to go in arbitration. So like Cargill had to read like all these old scripts. And guess who wrote a couple of drafts of that script? Stan Lee, like full scripts. And he said by far, Stan Lee scripts were the best. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but he was just like, like all of them brought something to the thing. But like if you could ever read Stan's like script, it feels like Doctor Strange, like full script. And here's the thing, right? Because of arbitration, like everybody was trying to fight for credit, trying to get a little bit of the money for this movie, right? The only person that didn't want no money was Stan. Stan was like, I shouldn't even be here. That's a real story. If you want to hear like a better version of that, you should go listen to that podcast. But I'm just telling you, On Writing. But like, it just shows you what type of person Stan was, right? Like, for all his, like, he didn't want any credit. He was like, no, I didn't work on this. I didn't work on this particular version of Doctor Strange, so like I shouldn't get any credit. But like, that's what I heard though, that Stan Lee's version of Doctor Strange, his his scripts are actually pretty good. So somewhere along the line, Stan Lee is probably a pretty good writer, even though
Yeah.
he, even if he didn't quite write, quote unquote, as we consider it now. But yeah, man, Stan got the Hulk on TV back in the 70s. The crappy Spider-Man show back in the 70s. Like, it was crappy, but you know, the Fantastic Four cartoons, that fucking Spider-Man theme, all that comes from Stan. Not that he wrote the Spider-Man theme, but just like to just get the stuff on TV, to get it out there. Stan had that ambition. And like, can you really fault him for that?
No, haters are just jealous.
Haters are just, we gonna boil this down to a Kardashian's quip. Oh, they just haters. No. I get what you're saying. Like, you know, I've heard comparisons to Bob Kane, and I think that's so fucking unfair. He is not a Bob Kane. Bob Kane completely wrote Bill Finger out the picture completely. You know what I'm saying? Like, Stan never did that. I don't think you should ever be compared to that asshole who literally did nothing. Damn near.
Did you ever meet Stan Lee?
I'm ashamed to say this. When his wife died last year, I was like, oh, I know how this goes. Usually, when you together that long, when one of you died, the other one's not that long for this world afterwards. And to his credit, he made like a whole year and a half, 2 years, right? So when Dragon Con was here, I paid $150 to get a picture with him. That was back in 2017. It was me, my son, my niece, and my nephew. We all have a picture with Stan Lee.
That's awesome.
I told him, like, you know, they was rushing people in and out. He was just sitting there because, you know, he was pretty frail, you know what I'm saying? So he'll just sit there and like, they're like, okay, take your picture, go. Stan, I loved everything you did. He like, oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, son. And like, so like, he talked to me for half a second. So like, it was nothing. He probably didn't remember me 3 seconds after it happened. But for me, it was every fucking thing. Then I got to stand next to Stan Lee and take a picture. And right now, it's still framed on my wall.
That's really cool.
So, Amanda, is there anything else you want to talk about this man?
No, I'm just like really grateful that we had a chance to kind of, you know, reflect on what he did a little bit, and not just like emotionally, like immediately after, but to like really kind of think through all of the things he did that we don't have words for.
Actually, you know, I've talked a lot on this one, but there's actually one more story I like to talk about Stan Lee. And this is one's going to blow your mind.
I'm ready.
Did you know Stan Lee helped create Power Rangers?
What? Okay.
Stan Lee, in a roundabout way, helped create Power Rangers. He made a deal with like Japan, and they licensed out Spider-Man. And you've seen clips of like Japanese Spider-Man where he grows big and stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That predates Power Rangers, but it's very Power Rangers like. So like that kind of influenced it. Super Sentai, that influenced Super Sentai to what Super Sentai actually became was those old Spider-Man clips. But specifically Power Rangers. Stan looked at Super Sentai, right? And was like, you know, I think this will work for American audience. And
very insightful.
and he was like, you know, how about we just dub it? And just, like, he had two ideas. He had two particular ideas. He said, you know, we can just dub it and just show it here. And motherfuckers was like, well, no, that's not gonna work. You know what I'm saying? Because kids are not gonna understand it. Which is crazy if you think about it, because years later, motherfuckers love fucking Dragon Ball Z, and that's about as Japanese as you can get. So they did do it, but it only aired in L.A. and it never got picked up. And his second idea was, you know, we can just, and this is what happened with Power Rangers, we can just keep the fight footage and just record like American parts for it, like when they're not in the suits, right? and they shot that down completely. And like one of his producers, Margaret Lachesh, right? She was with him trying to get this done, and it just didn't happen, right? So, like 5 or 6 years later, when Hamad Saban was in Japan, and he came up with the exact same idea, like completely independent of Stan, right? By that point, Margaret had moved on to Fox Kids as like an executive or like a creative force over there at Fox Kids. So when Saban came with this idea, since she had already dealings with this back in the early 80s with Stan trying to get this done, she was like, yes, let's put that on air.
Wow.
So Stan Lee indirectly is responsible for Power Rangers.
Maybe the most significant part of his legacy.
Exactly. Oh man, you know what, man? I'm really happy that we got to have this conversation about Stan Lee. He's a great talent. Like there'll never be another one like him. I know that said a lot, but I could never imagine anybody in comics ever with that type of creative like output, that type of vision when it comes to comic books, like ever again. Not in that way. So to Stan Lee, rest in peace.
Thus ends our tale. For now, we hope you enjoyed our scintillating saga of nefarious villains scheming and spectacular hero daring do. But until next time, true believers, Excelsior!
Try to be ambitious.
Speak a little wiser.
Try to be judicious.
Be a good advisor.
Never ever vicious.
And where will you
be then?
Face front! Lift your head! You're on the winning team!
You belong, you belong, you belong, you belong to the Merry Marvel Marching Society. March along, march along, march along to the song of the Merry Marvel Marching Society. If you growl, if you groan, and your score is nearly zero, do not howl, do not moan. You can be a superhero marching right along to the fighting song of the Merry Marvel Marching Society. Stand a little straighter, walk a little prouder, be an innovator, laugh a little.